Thank you for returning to listen to Episode 3 of Faith and Science in the News. This is Frank Lyon, your host. This podcast is produced and brought to you by the Blues to Joy Ministry Project. Please check out their website. In our last episode, I promised you some definitions. We need a common vocabulary in order to begin discussing the headlines we find in the news focused on the topic of faith and science. In this podcast, I will suggest a definition for the word science, followed by a definition of evolution. Darwinian evolution will then be discussed as one example of evolutionary theory. We will apply the methodology of science to the predictions of the Darwinian theory and see how it holds up. Dr. J.P. Moreland, in his book, Christianity and the Nature of Science, a Philosophical Investigation, suggests that there is no clear-cut definition of science, but I will give it a go. Science is both a label for our accumulated historical, systematized knowledge in the natural sciences, and also involves a method or process for deriving new information. The problem-solving approach for deriving information is called the scientific method and involves several steps. Step 1 is making observations concerning something that interests us. From that, step 2, we ask ourselves questions about those observations. Then step 3, we form a hypothesis or testable explanation related to the question. And then step 4, we make a prediction based on the hypothesis. Step 5, test the prediction by experimentation. Is the prediction supported or not? And then finally, step 6, use the results to form new hypotheses or predictions. To see how this works, we will look at two popular theories, Darwin's theory of evolution and Einstein's theory of general relativity. Both have provided numerous predictions. In this podcast, we will see how the first theory fares under the scrutiny of the scientific process. And then we will discuss the second theory in our next podcast. We will also consider the impact of each theory on our understanding of faith and science. But before we discuss Darwin's theory, let's look at the term evolution. In its simplest understanding, evolution means change over time. In its simplest form, examples would be the variation we see in antibiotic resistance, Galapagos finches, peppered moths, and so forth. In Darwin's book, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, he provided many examples of genetic manipulation using intelligent or artificial selection in plant and animal breeding for bringing out superior qualities in an organism. He then suggests that this type of adaptation is also evident in nature, not requiring any guidance, but random mutation with natural selection choosing the variations that will survive. Within a particular taxonomic unit, like a species, the name microevolution has been applied to this mechanism. Darwin's theory of evolution adds several predictions to this general concept of evolution. One prediction is that of common descent, or the concept of universal common descent. This is the idea that all living organisms are descended from a single common ancestor. Though there is some evidence presented, I'm still skeptical. Even if it were to be proven with overwhelming evidence, it would not affect my evangelical Christian understanding of Scripture. You would still have the question of how that original reproducing ancestor came into existence. We will take that up and do an evaluation of origin of life research in a subsequent podcast. Another prediction from Darwin's theory is that random variation generated by mutations acted upon by natural selection, as we just discussed, can account for all the variation we see in Darwin's tree of life since that original common ancestor. A term for this is macroevolution, and presents a major problem of explaining how many coordinated mutational events can occur by chance in a given amount of time. This presents a probability issue that can be mathematically analyzed using the tools of population genetics. What is the chance that coordinated mutational events can be fixed in a population to provide an adaptive advantage within the 3.5 to 4 billion years that life is estimated to have existed on Earth. It takes orders of magnitude too much time. It is known as the waiting time problem and has been well documented from all the genomic data we are now accumulating. The evidence does not support Darwin's prediction that this mechanism can account for the evolutionary history we see in the fossil record and in the genomes of organisms. In the blog, I will provide links to a very recent journal article on this topic and to a couple of books by Dr. Michael Behe. These first two predictions of common ancestry and the unguided natural selection mutation mechanism have led to another prediction. This prediction suggests the fossil record will demonstrate very gradual changes in the appearance of organisms over time. This is called phyletic gradualism, a slow and uniform process. It is not what we see in the fossil record. What we see in the fossil record are explosions of change, biological radiation or biological big bangs, if you will. The Cambrian explosion would be an example of this type of evolution. New types of organisms appear suddenly in the fossil record without any older fossils in the record gradually leading up to them. I will provide a link to a video presentation by paleontologist Dr. Gunter Beckley describing what we now know about the fossil record as it relates to Darwin's predictions. Darwin was aware of this problem and discusses it in The Origin of Species, Chapter 9. He describes the sudden appearance of organisms in the Silurian Formation. That's an old term for the Cambrian Formation, with no known fossils leading up to these organisms in the older strata. Darwin attributed the lack of evidence for his prediction of gradualism in the fossil record to the, and I quote here, poorness of our paleontological collections. Dr. Beckley will demonstrate in the video I mentioned that the fossil record collection is now very complete, and the issue of Darwin's doubt still exists. Dr. Stephen Meyer has written a book on the topic titled Darwin's Doubt, The Explosive Origin of Animal Life and the Case for Intelligent Design. There is a link to the book on my blog. The popular science media would like to have you think that there is only one theory of evolution. It is Darwin's, and it is a fact. So why did the late Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard come up with another theory called punctuated equilibrium to account for the missing predicted fossils in the record? But this theory also stumbles on the waiting time problem, as Dr. Beckley will discuss. And there are many other developing theories of evolution besides these two. Many scientists think Darwin's theory of evolution needs a rethink due to what we now know from the fossil record and the accumulating evidence from molecular biological research. Also on the blog, check out the link to a video by Dr. J.P. Moreland titled Doubts on Darwinism. You will discover a very surprising source in that video criticizing the Darwinian theory of evolution. In summary, the evidence is against the Darwinian theory of evolution when the scientific method is applied to the predictions in the light of the evidence. The evidence does not support the predictions of the theory. On the next podcast, we will see how the theory of general relativity stacks up against the scientific method. That will be followed by a podcast on defining various types of creationism, and then one on origin of life research. Again, this is Frank Lyon, your host for Faith and Science in the News. Be sure to check out the Episode 3 blog.